right, so here we are making that top wing. You can see I've already put the wooden spar on one side, and I put that little piece was little tab was glued to that side of the wing, and I've already put that part in, but that leaves the other side to add, and I put those little riblets in there. Not really tell you where they're supposed to go, but and that gives it a slight curve, which is nice. There's the top, and I've started to sort of try to fold it, and the idea is to do it carefully so that this thing will actually fit. And what I do is I put a little piece, something round. In this case, I use a little piece of aluminum tubing and another ruler and hold it, and I just very gently pull this over. Again, I did this many times in these videos, I guess, but it just reiterates how important it is to just not force the paper, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now I start gluing it up, and I'm just doing one part at a time. Glue the bottom tab and the bottom part of the spar. Match up the little cutout where the pilot's head is going to look up and out and over into his turn. And I've test fit this again to make sure when I do that, it comes out even on the top as well. But you just make sure this is nice and solid. Make sure everything dries straight. Glue is good. And a little pressure. You can see the spar is very even along that little curve, that little bend on the leading edge. Everything looks great. Now I'm forming the top a little bit because it does have a curve. And again, I've test fit this. I know that the trailing edge goes down and meets the trailing edge of the bottom. And just like any other wing parts and tails and all the rest, you just do the very edging. Because again, you don't want to squish so much glue and make everything glue together so that you get a trailing edge that looks like it's sort of collapsed almost. Some people put things like tissue paper in there, or some models have an extra fold that goes in there. And you can see how now I'm pushing that thing over. I know I can force it down and not crimp the front end. I'm trying to make sure it's a nice clean bend. You don't want it to, this paper is actually thick if you start working with it. And if it's too thick, what it does is ends up crinkling, and you don't want that to happen. You want it to this way, and that's why you sneak up on it. That's why you don't fold it over all at once. And then you can see my stomach. What horrible camera work. It gets better later, I promise. And you make sure that things fold over appropriately. And again, that glue is a godsend because it's really nice. It allows you time, but it also glues quick. And I'm folding bits over. Again, it's easy to do that or to sand little bits off and recolor them. Looks nice. And again, when these are done, these look all the world like any kind of plastic model. I wish this model had come with separate ailerons, and I guess I could have just cut them out and done it that way, but I didn't bother in this case. Here I'm sanding a little bit on the corner there, leading edge, but there you go. Making sure everything's good. The wing is done. It's fine. Now, these are the interplane struts. And what I've done is put in little pins into the top and into the bottom, and that's because in the real airplane, those actually show through. I guess there's tubular steel, and you can see them. The model's designed so that those struts just fit flush to the surface of the wings and on the underside of the top wing, but I wanted to make it more realistic, and so that's what I did. And I poked my holes already, and I'm just test fitting. I'm seeing how they're working. You can see it's balsa strut with paper on one side, which was the pattern. No, I'm pointing out that you'll see those little protrusions, and you're supposed to, and that's the way the real Pfalz was, at least based on pictures I've seen. That comes back to bite me a little bit later. Added some black around the edges so that things wouldn't mess up. There's one of the paper sides, and there's the other paper side. And these, by the way, were regular typing paper thickness. I put them on. I didn't want the struts to get too thick, because with 2 layers of thick paper and the balsa, I think it would kind of get chunky. So you just put that on there and squish it down carefully, make sure it dries, and then you can do a lot of sanding and playing around. In this case, I ended up just kind of crimping the edges. They look really nice. You can see they're rendered so that they're sort of got a faux, they got highlights on them, so they look round already. Again, can't say enough about Matt 77's repaints. They're really amazing. Edges now get coated with some black, just so that you don't have any white shiny pieces sticking out. I've made holes for those struts. I've also made holes for where the rigging is going to go ultimately, and I did this in all these places, and there's the holes for the cabane struts as well. Do all that beforehand. I've done it on the top of the bottom of the top wing too. There's where some struts go for the cabanes. There's where the interplanes go, and I've also poked holes for where the rigging is going to go. Just makes it a lot easier. Now I've test fit this, add a little bit of glue. In this case I used the white glue, and that was a mistake. I ended up kind of retrofitting it later and using the sign acrylate. But in any event, these things fit in if you test fit things and you're careful and you follow the directions, or, well, what there are of directions. But if you're careful at cutting, these things all fit just like a plastic model. And there it is. The struts do end up being out on the real airplane, slanted outward like that. And you're just looking again for making sure things are looking straight and even. But boy, it's exciting because it's starting to really look like an airplane now. Now what I've found is, through years of doing models, biplanes, is it seems counterintuitive, but if you add the interplane struts first, then let those dry, and then come back and add the cabanes, tends to work better. When I was little, I used to try to do the cabane struts first, and then I'd always end up with a crooked wing. And I forget who I was reading in a model magazine years ago. They were saying, well, yeah, you add the interplane struts, which are these, first, and then the cabanes come together nicely. And that was right. So here I am just kind of putting them into the right holes, making sure you're not putting them into the rigging holes. And there I'm fitting that part on. And then it's just a matter of making sure it doesn't have too much slant. You can see there's a lot of movement, see? And that's okay. That's nice, because then you got room to roam when you put on your cabane struts. In this case, mine was a little bit positive incidence, a little too much positive incidence, and the distance between the top and bottom wing are actually a little high. It's probably I don't know, 1/16 of an inch, or maybe a little more than it needs to be. In the end, though, now that I got the model in pretty good shape, I still like the way it looks. It isn't that noticeable. But there it is, making sure that center line is down. Do the same thing with the cabanes. These are wood with, again, wire coming out of the ends, top and bottom, glued to the into the wood, and then they're covered with paper. They're just exactly like I did the other struts. Now you put them into the side of the fuselage, and I got some glue on there. Now I add a little bit of glue to the metal. In this case, I got smart, and I'm using the thick cyanacrylate again. And you just very carefully, it's hard to get this on film, even if you're a professional, but bear with me. I tried to edit it so that you can actually see a couple of actual attachments, like you can't see a thing there. But in a moment, I think there's a better spot. I'm just trying to put them right into those holes, and with the pins and the wire, the holes, they fit right in like that. Same thing in the landing gear. There's the spreader bar, and there are those wheels, the struts. They're made exactly the same way. They are, in this case, only wire bent in a V to match the paper, and the paper's glued around them. And they look great, and they're plenty strong. Everything's wonderful. So that's the only part that's not balsa interior. I suppose I could have done the V struts like that. But now these fit. Again, I've tested them, but I can tell you there's very little testing that needed to be done. They fit nice, and they come in straight. People ooh and ah about Wingnut Wings kits, which are, again, fantastic kits. They're just lovely. But this, if you're just careful, oh my goodness, these are very easy to slip together. They look complicated, but man, do they work. So there you go. It's already in, and all you do is make sure it's straight. Now, it turns out, it's one problem with the kit is that the spreader bar is too narrow, and that makes the wheel, the landing gear, be too spindly and too tall. It looks kind of dumb. And what I ended up doing later was measuring and making a new spreader bar and removing it. That really helped. It was just a little bit, but that spreader bar, as is in these pictures, is a little bit narrow. But it looks better in the end. Still, it's working well. Now here's, I made the wheels. Now those are just O-rings I got from Ace Hardware, number 13s, and I ended up switching them down to number 12s. Again, the wheels were, I made them too big. And there is 2 pieces of 1/32 cross-grained with the paper cut out from the plans. That's glued to either side. And then I got a hole there for the axle, which is already in place. And now I went ahead and glued the grommet, or the O-ring on there. And it worked great. And this is exactly how like I said, I redid the wheels to make them slightly smaller because they look much better. These wheels, again, look too big once it's done. In the videos, it looks okay, and you get the idea. But I definitely wanted to do a better job, so I made them smaller. So when you see the model at the end, you'll see that they're different. But the idea is absolutely this very same. So you can go ahead and test these, and I put them up into the axle. There's a little hole there. They fit right in. They'll be glued in later. But it's really exciting to put them together because they really start to look cool, even though these are too big. And again, not far enough apart. But they still give you the idea. Oh, and the O-rings there have been painted just with Tamiya primer, gray primer, which to me approximates kind of the rubber that I'm looking for. You have to rough them up first with some sandpaper, and then the primer sticks pretty well, although not perfectly. I do have to go back and touch them up a little bit. But anyway, when you get to this point, like I said, even though these are long and spindly and actually are incorrect, they look okay when done.